In my opinion, scene 5 is marked with a very threatening tone that runs throughout the entire scene. The scene opens with a violent fight between Eunice and Steve, followed then by a hostile interchange between Stanley and Blanche. You can tell that in this apartment building, tensions are running high and they're running very, very strong. It also becomes quite evident in this scene that Stanley knows something about Blanche, or Stanley is starting to suspect things about Blanche, and he begins to confront her about this. I think it's interesting that scene 3 ends with a fight between Stella and Stanley, and scene 5 begins with a fight between Steve and Eunice. Steve and Eunice are fighting about infidelity, that Steve has been going upstairs at the Four Deuces bar, which is kind of a suggestion that he's been visiting prostitutes or visiting other women. And Eunice says she's even seen him chasing a blonde woman around. And this couple, kind of like Stella and Stanley, fighting isn't enough, arguing isn't enough. Their discussions turn violent. They hit each other, they chase each other, but then by the end of the scene, they've made up with each other, very much like Stella and Stanley. And like the other characters in the story, Stella's reaction to the physical violence that's occurred upstairs is really kind of a nonchalant reaction. She hears that Eunice and Steve have had this big fight. She has seen the bruises. But when she hears they've made up, she goes, oh, that's much more practical. But kind of like Mitch in scene 3, Stella just doesn't really react to this. This kind of abuse is accepted and quite frequent at the Elysian Fields apartment building. I've always felt like scene 5 was a truly indicative scene when you're trying to understand William's style. By beginning the scene with a fight, he sets this immediate tone of frustration, anger, annoyance, and then he continues this feeling by having Stanley confront Blanche. Blanche is sitting in the house, the apartment. Stanley says he knows somebody who knows something about her, knows that she's been um, in some trouble in the past. And this is a really kind of almost a veiled threat. Stanley is threatening to expose Blanche's past. Now, we don't know what's happened in the past. Stanley doesn't know what's happened in the past, but he knows that something's not right. And we can tell that this unnerves Blanche. She starts to dab herself with her perfume. She's fidgeting. She becomes so anxious. She spills her Coca-Cola. That Stanley's threat here has her unnerved. And in addition to sweating a little bit, getting shaky, putting the perfume on, Blanche literally turns pale at the thought of her past being exposed. So this tells us that there is something in Laurel, there's something in Blanche's past that's that's bad, that's really that she doesn't want to come to light. The question is, what is it? Why did she run away from Laurel? What is she running away from? In scene 5, we do learn a little bit more about Blanche's romantic life, and we're going to get to the young man in just a moment because I know that's the part that everybody's kind of freaking out over. But in scene 5, she does talk about Mitch. Mitch is supposed to come over this evening. Their relationship is progressing. Blanche thinks at this point she might actually even be able to trick Mitch into marrying her. He doesn't even know her real age. He doesn't really know anything about her background. But according to Blanche, none of that matters. Love doesn't matter. Knowing the person you're marrying doesn't matter. All that matters is that you'll be taken care of. So here again, we see the theme of manipulation. So far throughout the play, Blanche has pretty much always been in white or light colors. And she says this is kind of her effort, her attempt to attract and hold on to men. That by dressing in light colors, soft colors, she can appear to be like a butterfly's wing. Very elegant and pure. Part of this is a virginal thing too as well. Always being dressed in white is to give this idea of a bride, We know as the reader, though, that she's a bit more of a spider than just a butterfly. She kind of draws men in the way she's drawing Mitch in. I do want you to think about why her dressing gown, her bathrobe, is a bright red, though, something that she wears around Stella and Stanley's house. Where scene 4 is all about Stella and Blanche, scene 5 is all about Blanche and men. We see Blanche react to a variety of situations with men. And every time her behavior is different. When she's with Stanley, she's on edge, she's defensive, she's angry. With the young man, she's flirtatious, seductive, some people say creepy. With Mitch, she appears to be happy and virginal. That Blanche changes her demeanor to reflect the men that she's around. She doesn't know who she really is, or she doesn't want anyone to know who she really is. So, the episode with the young man always freaks people out. It is disturbing, it is upsetting. The reason Williams includes this is to further highlight the contradictions within Blanche's character. She is desperate to marry Mitch. She wants to marry him, but she's willing to risk her entire future to flirt with a young paperboy. Mitch is on his way over, and here Blanche is kissing and, stroking the cheek of a young man. Also, she demands that Mitch bow to her like a gentleman, but we know that her behavior is not that of a lady. So, this contradiction is to make us think more about her character. I think it also shows us how hypocritical Blanche really is. She condemns Stella and Stanley's sexual relationship, but she's prepared to have an inappropriate encounter of her own with a young man, just a teenager. Does she really have any room to judge other people? Critics have always talked about this scene, scene 5, focusing on Blanche with the young man. And I want you to think a little bit about why Blanche flirts with him. What is she hoping to get out of this? Some critics say that Blanche throwing herself at the paperboy serves to remind the audience of her fragility and vulnerability. That because she's worried about losing her beauty, she knows she's getting older, she throws herself at a young man to make herself feel better. That by tempting a young man, she will feel young too. I question this. I'm not sure this is Williams' motivation here. So I really, when you come in tomorrow, I want to talk about why she does what she does with the young man. In scene 5, Williams introduces astrological signs as a symbol. Blanche is talking about astrological signs. She says that Stanley must be an Aries because he's so loud and aggressive, but he tells her that he's a Capricorn. The symbol for a Capricorn is a goat, someone stubborn, domineering. This describes Stanley perfectly. Blanche, of course, is a Virgo, meaning the virgin, and this is reflective in how she wants everyone to see her as pure and innocent. Stanley laughs at Blanche, though, at her status of being a virginal Virgo. He knows what we know, that there is something not right about Blanche. She is not the woman she pretends to be. Blanche's perfume is also another symbol in this scene. When she's confronted by Stanley about somebody named Shaw, she begins to dab herself with her perfume. And I know it's kind of gross, but the original purpose of perfume was to cover up body odor. Here, Blanche isn't covering up BO, she's covering up her discomfort. She's hoping that by distracting Stanley with this very expensive perfume, he'll change the subject, he'll start to talk about something else. We know that with Stanley, that's not going to work. He's not tempted by expensive things, he's not distracted by Blanche's femininity or her beauty. Williams uses clothing in scene 5, similar to the way he uses it in scene 3, as a way of building symbolism. In scene 3, the men were wearing brightly colored shirts to reflect their power and their masculinity. Here we have Stanley reappearing in his brightly colored bowling shirt because he is about to assert his dominance and his control over Blanche. He is going to attempt to call her out on her lies. And so he needs to wear this brightly colored shirt to kind of give him his power. Blanche is wearing white. She's wearing a light color, as always, spills soda on her skirt, and she begins to dab at it, and she's very concerned about the stain. Williams is showing us here that, like her skirt, Blanche is not as pure or as clean as she appears to be. Williams is slowly revealing Blanche's character in this play. Each scene we learn a little bit more, we see a little bit more about who Blanche is. I want you to think about one of her last lines from this scene. She tells the newspaper boy to run on home, to go home, because she's got to be good and keep her hands off of children. I want you to think about why she says this. What's the significance of this line?